wartime situation that people tend to do extreme things. But Avery, I want to start with you and the violence.
All right.
I just don't get this. What is so great? What is so liberating about smashing the readers for people traveling on the MTR?
Well, first of all, we have to look at the whole incident over the course of the 3 months, right? Now, if specifically towards the incidences within MTR, people do remember that 3 months ago, 2 months ago, even 1 month ago, nobody cares about the MTR. I mean, people are just riding along as usual. Now, why people are now turning against MTR is the fact that now MTR is now more and more cooperating with the police. Specifically, they are now stopping train stations to not allow people to attend marches or rallies, even the ones that are authorized. And then for those people who finish the marches, remember the day in Kuntao, and then they can't even go back home. Now, secondly, that's to the point whereby how the MTR has been dealing with chaos or violence within the stations. Now, back in the Yunnan incidents, I mean, what could the MTR do? I mean, they called the police, but then the police did not respond. So it wasn't from their part. But however, I think about a few weeks ago is when the Prince Edward station incidents, whereby the police actually enter into the MTR premise and enter into the train to beat up passengers or protesters. Now, people are angry towards the MTR is because the MTR are protecting or allowing the police to do these sort of things. So people do remember that.
Sorry, how does the MTR stop policemen exercising their duty?
No, well, you do remember that for the policemen to exercising their duty within the stations, they have to first of all have the authorization and the authorization of the MTR.
No, they don't.
They do.
No, in pursuit of a crime, they do not.
Well, again, exactly your point then.
Right.
If there's a crime,
yes.
But then where was the crime? Where was the crime within the Prince Edward?
How about smashing the...
Well, that's after. That's what I'm saying. After the whole event. I mean, for smashing the ticket machines and all these facilities, of course, it's breaking the law. So obviously the police can enforce the law. But what I'm saying is, why at the beginning people would get angry towards the MTR, and then all these damages ensue afterwards. So there's a causality there, and that is why
Fanny, you were waving your arm.
Right. Avery, I think to start with, being a civilized society, I think no matter how angry we are, violence is not the answer. I don't accept that. And I really think that our politicians, leaders of political parties, should be standing up to advise our young people to stop this violence. And I heard Jade or somebody who was talking about free sex. I think we have confirmed that this is the true case. So I'm so sad for these young girls who have been misled into offering free sex. And I think this is the time that we should lower the temperature of the community rather than continue to incite anger and emotions. I think it's just nonsensical to see people crying, kneeling on the floor, claiming that 6 lives had been killed, at the Prince Edward station. Well, this is all acting, and yet the whole purpose, I suspect, is to incite anger and to encourage more people to come out to sustain the momentum of the so-called revolution.
Yes, there are stories, aren't there, that somebody died and the police have smuggled away the body.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Jesus and resurrection, and people said people have just stole the body of Jesus. Avery, you are well educated, and I think as a learned individuals, we must all promote more civilized approach to even vent our anger. There are different ways of doing it without affecting the livelihood of ordinary people. And I have sort of several appeals. First is the appeal to the political leaders that we should come out. There is no, apart from Fernando, who said, as Hugh said, or your listener said, it was Ling, is it, who said the Fernando melodramatic. And I think we should have more sensible political leaders coming out to analyze what is the root cause of all these. I have heard various reasons for protesting from among young people, including secondary school students. They said their freedom would be lost if we don't come out to protest now, because by 2047 we'll become part of China, mainland China, and therefore we'll lose all forms of freedom. And this cannot be farthest from the truth.
What is then the root cause of these demonstrations?
I really think that this is a continuation of Occupy Central.
Yes.
And it's motivated and by people like Jimmy Lai, who openly spoke about that, even in the United States, shamelessly spoke about this. And of course there are problems within the society too. And
again, sorry. What is the root cause or causes then, are you saying?
I think they feel that the Hong Kong systems or the political system is unfair.
Well, yes. And I think, Fanny,
so the root cause is a feeling among young people
that Hong Kong is unfair. The system is unfair. Their voices are not heard.
Okay.
And they see incidents over the past 2 years which inspire fear among them that the freedoms would be further restrained.
If that's the root cause, how would you address that? How would you fix that?
Well, anything that affect the central government or will require the approval of leaders in Beijing, I think we have to set aside for the time being. I think the immediate issue is for us all to calm down emotions and then start this dialogue. And I think this is what Carrie Lam is trying to do.
Sorry, Fanny, I got to come in here.
Yeah.
I think you analysed it correctly, but the solution and reason why this extradition bill was because started the fire is because there was so much kindling on the ground.
Yeah.
They didn't trust the chief executive to protect Hong Kong people in that, and they didn't trust the legislative council to vet the bill from their point of view.
Yeah, absolutely right. Therefore, when I say dialogue, I do mean communication within the community in every sector. And I've also said to middle managers and families, parents and teachers that there is such division even within a family, within small organization, that we should draw out the feelings, find out what they are most unhappy about, and feed back to the government to do something about it. I don't think it's just the responsibility of Carrie Lam alone. And as you say, whenever she appears, maybe she invites more riots on the street. I don't know. But she has to go into the crowd, meet the people, and discuss. And I am starting various dialogues with groups of young people, and I know how they feel. And I can see that in some ways, they also have misconception about one country, two systems. And what is the red line? I asked them, how do you learn the basic law in school? They only learn two things. First, Hong Kong practices the common law. Mainland does not have rule of law. Secondly, Hong Kong has capitalism, and in the mainland is communism. So that naturally, they develop this anti-China feeling. So I think we have to start from the very basics, set up these dialogues, find out any misconception, and then we just address them one by one.
They didn't sound like misconceptions. They sounded like...
No. They don't have the full picture. I put it this way. It's not misconception. It's a partial picture of what China today looks like.
Okay, Avery.
No, I think I got to correct Fanny Law on many points. First of all, on the issues of free sex, I mean, first of all, sex should be free. So this is there's self-love. And secondly,
for the warriors,
and for the warriors, the kids, they could still have a summer holidays. They can still find love, so they don't need to incite violence.
This phenomenon is not exclusive to Hong Kong.
No.
Isis brides, young girls, very emotional.
Yeah, people can still get that on the beach, and while during summer holiday, not risking their lives getting fired at by the police. Now, and secondly, towards the issues of the whole conflict. Again, we have to look at the context and the pictures. 3 months ago, if Carrie Lam would just listened to the people, the peaceful march of 1 million people at the beginning of 9th of June, there wouldn't be any angers. Now, even on the day of the electoral voting, supposedly on the 12th of June, yes. I mean, there was clashes, there was violence, but it was like not that big a deal. However, still, the Carolyn wouldn't listen. So the whole saga went on, and it. It pushed the angers within the younger individuals as well as the whole of Hong Kong people. And you recognize that out of all these different opinion polls, the demand and the anger of people has been shifting from just focusing on withdrawing the bill towards the actual the most important issue is the investigation against police violence. Now, if you look at violence itself, then you have to look at it with proportionality. And as one of the listeners was accusing RTHK of fake news of allotting very different times to these incidents, it's because of proportionality. When people are blaming or looking at young protesters damaging ticket machines and all these. Yep. And then at the same time, like 2 nights ago, there was 10 police officers with batons beating up one single kid within Taipo stations. And he's now still in hospitals. So there's again, if Fanny, you want to look at it, there's violence within the protesters. Avery, we have to look at it, the cause. And again, secondly, and that's where the anger boils up to another high point, is that apparently there's undercover police disguising as protesters, and people only discover their identities when they were called upon.
Well, okay. How else would the police find out?
Well, Avery, I don't think we are here to apportion blame. There's no point about it.
You were blaming the kids to going out for marches for sex.
No. I am saying that we should look forward and find a solution. And I believe that the chief executive has already offered olive branches in response to the peaceful demonstration on the 18th of August.
Then tell the police to back off and stop using violence, 10 batons against the kids.
Police have said it very clearly.
Gas cannons to reporters last night, the night before, without any inciting actions. So again,
you are presenting the partial picture.
Okay. Here's some more partial comments from listeners. Once again, our email backchat@rthk.hk, or pick up the phone and you can talk directly to them. Okay. So Andrew says, I wonder how many of the rioters at the American Embassy on Sunday would like to go to the USA, live in a sanctuary city in a tent with the whole street as your toilet, and everyone else's too. Paradise. I'm sure the Hong Kong government will pay for your ticket, one-way economy class. Andrew also says, when Central MTR was closed on Sunday afternoon, why were the so-called press allowed to remain? They should have been evicted too. I doubt that half of them are actually press anyway. Richard says, Dean says, let's do Richard's in a moment. Dean says, Dear Hugh, there's so much civilian news with anyone able to craft a narrative. I saw a phone-recorded video of a protester with a hose watering the electricals at the MTR and smashing CCTV. Later, there's complete chaos at the MTR, with protesters wanting CCTV footage to show what's really happened inside the station. I assume they're insinuating police are the real thugs and hiding the footage. This would act to mobilize action, which seems endless. If protesters are both trashing CCTV and calling for its footage, is this not protesters trying to shape the narrative for the media? Scary times. And that's signed Dean, a past expat. Ron says, Dear Miss Law, I know that during your past service with the government, you had tried to reform the education system. Given that many protesters are relatively young and disaffected, in retrospect, what more, in your opinion, could or should the government have done to avoid the situation we have today?
Yeah. Thank you. Can I address the last question?
Sure.
Yeah, I think we have, since 1997, have introduced modules on modern China into our curriculum. But unfortunately, the Education Bureau is not able to strictly supervise or control how teachers are teaching these modules. As I said, I asked the young people, how do you learn basic law? And if teachers only point out the two systems and where we differ, and then downgrade the changes that have happened in China since 1978. There is no wonder students have developed this anti-China feelings. But of course, there are shortcomings still within our country. There is no denial about it. But we have to present the full picture objectively, and I think this is about time that we should revamp both the pedagogy and also the textbook, and maybe we should also have more regular inspections of how teachers are actually.
I have one question.
I've got a question for Fanny.
Can I answer another question and I'll respond to another point about press coverage of these protests? Indeed, I have had expatriate colleagues who told me that they were amazed. These are reporters, expatriate reporters from overseas who flew in to cover the protests. And they were amazed to see that our reporters are allowed to run around just like any protester. They said in the United States they have designated zones, and reporters are required to stay within the zone to cover that event. There is no real-time 9-hour broadcast nowhere in this world. I think Hong Kong has been peaceful for too long. We have not established rules for dealing with riots and protests.
Fanny, I want to come back to this thing about a lack of knowledge about China.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the huge benefits of living in Hong Kong is access to news from all over the world.
Yeah, but they
and
don't
the ability to Google.
Yep.
As soon as you go across the river,
Yep.
you can't Google anymore.
Yep.
And young people are aware of this. See, it's not just a problem of the pedagogy, it's the, I may have pronounced that wrongly, but I'm sure you'll correct me, but it's a fact of life that I can't WhatsApp when I'm in the mainland.
Well, it's everybody's choice whether they want to go across the border. But to smash MTR stations because of anti-China feeling, that's not right.
It's not a logical construction.
No, I think first of all, I have to ask, because Fanny has been focusing on her suggestion on national education, more education, because there's a misunderstanding by the young people. Now, first of all, there was like 1 million or 2 million or any number in between of Hong Kong people coming out and march against this bill.
About
around that number, right?
About 2 million on the 16th.
So and on the whole, most of them are not just teenagers. I mean, it can all across the board. So there's sentiment shared not just from the kids but everyone. And secondly, and I may have to ask you, that by introducing national education, would that solve the issue of like thugs and tribe members randomly attack passengers in MTR?
No,
and why would it stop? Would it help the police to confront the tribes and investigate those violence? And would it encourage people within the government on the pro-establishment camp to just not focusing on a damaged ticket machine and focus on tribe members using knives and sticks to attack random passengers? And now the police are only like arrested a dozen of them.
Mr. Law?
So there's proportionality.
Avery, I was only responding to the listener's email about education system. That's going to take a very long time to resolve. But Avery, I really hope that for the next 30 minutes, we should focus on the way forward rather than looking back. Who was wrong in the first instance? Who incited all these protests in the first place? I think the chief executive has already apologized to the Hong Kong community, and she also admitted that the FOB, the bill was badly handled. So the way forward, she has offered an olive branch by withdrawing the bill completely. And then she also enhanced the public credibility of the IPCC by having new members. And I would like to hear, what else should be done. For example, if Avery, you have personal experience with IPCC, you can offer suggestions. How do we, short of a COI, and I think there are shortcomings with the COI as well, as Henry Lytton has already pointed out. So I think people are mesmerized by the word independent. But in fact, IPCC is also independent.
Oh,
it. Well, we're going to break for the news now at 9 o'clock, and a great many emails to share after that. I'm going to have to edit for length, so as I always say, if you pick up the phone, you can talk directly to our guests without me chopping your words. Okay, here's the weather before the news now. It's going to be hot today with sunny periods. Temperatures up to about 32 degrees in the urban areas, warmer in the new territories. 30 degrees, the latest readings, and the relative humidity is now at 80%. Back in 3 minutes' time. Welcome back. This is Backchat on a Monday morning, first one of the week with Mike Rouse and me, Hugh Chiverton. We're talking about latest developments. We have with us Executive Councillor Fanny Law and Avery who's Chairman of the League of Social Democrats. Why don't you give us a call? Our number is 233-88266. You can also comment on our Facebook page, Backchat and RTHK Radio 3, or email us. Okay, some of the emails that we've had, as I say, these will have to be edited for length. Richard says, Dear Backchat, I understand we will not be reading certain emails any longer. Perhaps you suggested previously you suggested forcing listeners to send in Twitter-sized messages. Is this yet another sign of your censorship? Each day you become more and more like the Chinese government's censorship bureau or Singapore's. Some people have suggested Hong Kong be more like Singapore. RTHK is leading the way. Richard also says, Dear Ms. Law, in your opinion, why does the government continue to waste taxpayers' money on a radio station, RTHK, that constantly broadcasts biased programming that's divided the community to the great detriment of Hong Kong overall? If the government were to conduct an independent audit, it would confirm the contention of several listeners that RTHK is biased, spreads fake news, provides inaccurate reporting, and is now thoroughly despised by a growing number of locals. AY says, question from Ms. Fanny Law on your show. As the 2018 Audit Commission report shows, RTHK had doubled the proportion of reruns it broadcast over the previous 3 years, and Channel 31 only had a viewership rating of 0.1% in the first half of 2018. In the recent years, RTHK Radio 3's ability to serve the local community has been questioned. RTHK 3 provides rehashed BBC content and Western-focused programs that are disconnected from its audience. With such embarrassing viewership, RTHK Radio 3, we don't have viewers, still resists public scrutiny of their performance and the purpose of their existence. No more rehash international news. We need programs which focus on current local events that relate to the audience. We need more programs on developments in mainland China and the Greater Bay Area and how they affect Hong Kong. I do business in the Great Bay Area, and I would welcome English-speaking experts on how I can have a better grasp of news of that region. Thank you very much indeed for that. Peter says, another weekend of extreme mob violence, vandalism, arson, attacks on police and civilians. These morons destroying our public infrastructure and transit system. They are fascist, anarchists and traitors, but somehow they only get awarded commentary and meaningful media coverage after the police storm in to subdue them. Why do people like Avery and the Pan Democrats either actively hinder police in their law enforcement actions or provide political cover and simply act as propaganda mouthpiece for the rioters? There is an urgent need for an independent investigation in the role of political protest supporters, local and international media. Martin says, to the morons and all their supporters who came up with the slogan, Revolution of Our Times, let me contrast this with a quote from Mao. Revolution is not a dinner party or writing an essay or painting a picture. Revolution is an insurrection. Martin says, you have never experienced real violence, civil war and social upheaval, but you long for it. You don't even have political goals. It is a pretense for your hate against China. You feel empowered by your senseless violence and meaningless destruction. In the past 13 weeks, you have made yourself 1.4 billion enemies on mainland China. Meanwhile, you depend on the mainland for 95% of your basic livelihood and economy. Henri says, Mr. Avery the chairman of the League of Social Democrats, was defeated in LegCo elections in 2012 after obtaining only 0.96% of the votes. In the 2016 LegCo election, he switched to the Kowloon West constituency and was defeated again after getting 2.4% of the votes. That's a pitiful performance as a candidate. No wonder he and his followers have to resort to other means against their political rivals. Can Mr. Avery please explain how he can represent Hong Kong people as the likes of him always claim to represent us, like myself, an average Hong Kong resident of 30 years? This is, there's no name on this, but it says, people here think Africa is backwards, yet locals and your station listen to people like Avery Ng, who just spreads false propaganda. Did Avery Ng ever issue a blanket condemnation or even an appeal against violence? Since coming here from Guyana, I have come to learn much about news manipulation, prejudice reporting, and what Donald Trump likes to call fake news. I see videos of what they claim to be reporters throwing objects at police, and see people who say they are legislators or politicians obstruct police actively. Then these same people make excuses for terrible acts committed by protesters. And you have the nerve to accuse my home continent of Africa of being third world. At least we have some inkling of reality. Miko says, it seems the police rarely attempt to arrest or stop protesters from vandalizing public property on the spot, like those who set MTR exit on fire on Sunday, or even those breaking into Legco back in July. What could be the reason for that? Fergus says, please ask Fanny Law why Carrie Lam was not sensitive to the antipathy to the mainlandization of Hong Kong, as she now concedes. All the warning signs were there. We even had street protests about parallel traders. It's leadership by the blind indeed. Explain, Mrs. Law. Also, Ms. Law, please go back and explain to Carrie Lam what the rule of law really is. She is seemingly being brainwashed and mainland herself as she adopts its narrow definition routinely in the past 3 years. Venti Karam says, it's 3:15, I can't sleep. Can't sleep after watching what's happening in Hong Kong. One of the safest cities in the world, rocked by unprecedented violence, is being destroyed from within. Whatever the cause may be, violence and vandalism is not the solution, and any individual or group which resorts to such tactics must be condemned by people from all walks of society. It's time people in places of power who can sway the opinions of others come together and bring the violence and vandalism to an end, irrespective of your political convictions. Matthew says there was some disturbing news this weekend that was not well covered in the English media. On Saturday, representatives of the DAB met with the Secretary for Security to make 7 demands. These demands included strongly opposing an independent commission of inquiry and calling on the Civil Service Bureau to do the same, legislation of new contempt of cop and anti-mask laws, and perhaps most outrageously that the Education Board set up a teachers' watchdog unit to monitor teachers' behaviour, including a point system and classroom video and audio monitoring. While these demands may represent a very tiny minority of Hong Kong people, it further highlights how pro-Beijing political parties like the DAB, as well as our government, continue to refuse to listen to and represent the perspective of the majority. It's a shame because there is so much these people in power of privilege could do to help both Hong Kong and the CCP if only they had the courage to honestly represent the views of Hong Kong people to Beijing. Elliot says, one reason the media coverage can come across as biased is that the police don't know how to handle the press. They have their blue-vested media liaison people who try to shepherd reports around, and officers who work on the high floors of Arsenal House holding press conferences, but police commanders on the street don't give interviews and in fact can be quite brusque with reporters. I've not seen an example of reporters being embedded with the police as has happened in other conflicts. Bowen says, it's futile to pretend that recent protests are just an outburst caused by the single row over the extradition bill. It's one caused by the accumulation of the actions and policies of the SAR government since CY Leung became CE. From day one until now, Carrie Lam has treated the objections to the extradition bill with far too cavalier an attitude. All the damages and injuries, not to mention the impact on business suffered by society so far, are highly avoidable if the right decisions were made by the government at the right times. The problem is even now the CE insists on adopting towards the setting up of an independent inquiry the same attitude which he adopted to the suspension and withdrawal of the bill, which was the main cause of the problem. It seems no amount of explanation will get her to understand that recruiting the 5 foreign experts to advise the IPCC on police procedures and practices would not help solve the problem of ill will and bad blood already created between the public and the police by the latter's actions, and in some cases inaction, in the last several months. What's of even greater long-term significance, the IPCC cannot investigate into how the government's past practices, mindset and attitude allowed a case of maladministration, which could have been corrected at many points, to evolve into a crisis which has shaken the foundations of governance. That comes from Bowen. Laura says, Fanny Law should not equate fake news of protesters dying at Prince Edward to Jesus' resurrection. XC says, Fanny, it's a revolution, dear. Calm down yourself. All your comfy life and your comfy friends will be swept away by violence because revolutions are violent. People will die Blood will be shed and destruction will be random and generalized. The people have spoken. Live with it. Even better, join in on the right side of history. If you're not with it, you're against it. G says, why would anyone listen to a pan-Dem legislator when Carrie has from the start sidelined them, refused to see them, and on announcing the proposed withdrawal of the bill, did so not by inviting all elected legislators to tell them, but only the pro-government ones and other non-legislators. Do as you say, but not do as you do. And Toby again says, police officers, this is on the access to the MTR, police officers can patrol any public place, including the MTR, without permission or warrant. Avery needs to learn the law and stop justifying destruction in the MTR. That's a selection of the emails that we've been receiving. Can I have a question? I know. Fanny, why not have a? I don't understand the difference. What is such a big difference between a commission of inquiry and a very, very expanded IPCC, which is with a special unit and special people flown in? Why not just have a commission of inquiry?
I think there have been various people with goodwill have suggested an independent commission of inquiry, but I have actually discussed with various people how feasible the idea is, and I fear that actually by promising a COI, then people started to quarrel about membership and also the terms of reference. And Henry Lytton has wisely also pointed out that some of the root causes are actually very well known already and should be tackled directly by the government without delaying further by having another commission to look at it. And I think that's very wise counsel. I think the problem with IPCC is a lack of trust, because people think that it's CAPO that is investigating the police, and that's why I think the CE, although I didn't know the candidates in the first place, she appointed two independent individuals that are credible, that are more credible from, at least from the public perception, and are better known to the general public to be members of the IPCC. And I think we have to trust Anthony Neil would do a good job. That's why I asked Avery.
Okay, the IPCC can only look at the police, can't it?
Yes, and therefore the CE proposed dialogue with the people and also set up panels to look at wider issues. And I think the anti-China sentiment...
Well, you say that, but she promised that on July the 2nd in a speech, and here we are.
And the IPCC
because
is not
the violence...
I'm sorry.
No. The panel, a separate panel, because one of the 4 actions that the chief executive has proposed is to set up expert panels. And personally, just speaking for myself, I haven't even discussed with anyone, is that I think we need a review of the one country, two systems. We are approaching the middle of the 50 years, when we said...
my only thought is that, so you've got these expert panels in whatever form they take.
Yeah.
You've got the boosting up of you've got these 2 members appointed to the IPCC to look at their normal work. You've got these 5 experts who are coming in and having sort of extraordinary powers for this other study. Why not just have a commission of inquiry? Why are you doing all these? You're doing
there are now over 25 incidents. Even the IPCC can feel the weight of the workload involved. Can you expect
then have a committee? Sorry, that's an argument for a commission of inquiry.
That is one aspect of it. But as I said, and as Henry Lytton has wisely pointed out, if you have wide rims, we clearly don't want to duplicate the work of the IPCC, because IPCC has already started.
But you're inviting those academics and all those those people to speculate and to look at the widest terms of this. Why not have all this together under a commission of inquiry?
Well, you are reinventing the wheels, doing the same thing. You have to appoint a whole bunch of people, and the commission of inquiry can, at most from past experience.
Sorry, you're not having a commission of inquiry because you've already started work on something else.
Well, we have already started work. The IPCC has already started work by inviting consultants, experts to come in. And
honestly, that's not very convincing. You're saying you can't do it because you've already started doing something else.
Partly it's because of the workload, partly it's because of the duplication of effort. And why don't we have a separate organization, also independent, to look at the wider issues? The maladministration, as one of your listeners have pointed out.
Will the evidence be given to the IPCC under oath? Will you be breaking the law if you lie to the IPCC?
You know, that is. I also want to point out a difference between what people want an independent inquiry for this fiasco compared with previous COIs. The previous commissions only deal with a single issue, where the witnesses are very well identified. You know who to summon, and they give evidence under oath. But here, B. Water, who are the witnesses? How do you?
I just out of interest, Fanny, with the expanded IPCC, would they have the right to subpoena witness to give statements or even investigate or gather evidence?
You know, the chief executive has already said she would give her full support to the IPCC.
I mean the right to subpoena witness.
They don't have the right to subpoena, but I think if there are so many aggrieved individuals in the community, IPCC invite them to come forward on a voluntary basis.
Well, but then
subpoena. Who do you want to subpoena in the first place? Avery.
You want to subpoena the tapes from inside the stations that the MTRC is holding.
Well, I think the MTRC will be, being a government organization, a statutory body, would cooperate with IPCC.
And what about the journalists who've also recorded things on their mobile phones or in other ways? There's no power to insist that they produce those tapes either, is there?
Well, in any case, they would not. They would. Whatever they have published, they would give to the police. Even under existing power, you can ask for a warrant from the court to request submission of this.
But not from the IPCC, though.
Not from the IPCC.
Okay, a lot more emails. Sorry, we just have so many emails. I've just got to edit them for length. As I say, please pick up the phone and talk. You can talk directly to our guests. Nick says, the first crime at Prince Edward was committed by the rioters by attacking 6 elderly gentlemen. Avery just wants to ignore the facts. Bernadette says, tell her that China has to accept Tiananmen Square killings before Hong Kong people accept China. Mr. Wong says, Backchat will become faster relevant if the caliber of your guests and hosts are at the low level as Mike and Fanny. By the way, says Mr. Wong, I've just switched listening to Radio 4. Alan says, could you please ask Avery to at least voice his displeasure at the destruction of public property, and Fanny to explain why the CE ignored the march on the 9th of June and why EXCO went along with a second reading on the 12th of June instead of deferring the bill for further consultation and explanation. Sam says, it appears that politicians are inciting or supporting or encouraging violence and whitewashing the perpetrators for votes. We don't see Fernando Chung pleading with the vandals anymore as he did when Legco was being vandalized. Paul says, having listened to your panel, tells me that both sides believe that people's rights come from the government. This is fundamental a communist principle, which of course means that the current situation in Hong Kong is a bunch of communists fighting a bunch of communists, resulting in a call for more surveillance, which suits a big communist government nicely. Have we really become this stupid, says Paul. Mark says, if you want to dial things down a bit, why can't the protesters commit to not vandalise public property from, say, now until the 1st of October, and then the police in turn commit to only monitor protest events with no tear gas, etc. With such a truce in place, can conversation between someone in government and someone representing the protesters begin? Carol Peterson, Professor Peterson, says, Fanny Law's comments indicate that she thinks the opposition to the amendments proposed by Carrie Lam was based on some irrational fear of China or an incomplete understanding of its legal system. I'm sorry, but she's mistaken about this. There's nothing irrational about opposition to the bill. Sadly, modern China still lacks the rule of law and does not have the right to fair trial. Just ask some of the many lawyers in China who are sitting in jail because they dared practice law like professional attorneys. James says, come on, Backchat, stop reading out the latest unsubstantiated anti-protest smears by the propaganda drones. The latest comfort women story is a new low, even for habitual liars who advocate arbitrary violence. Fanny Law is culpable in this. Got any proof? Stop spreading hateful rumours and hang your head in shame. Ravi says, I would like to ask Fanny a question in regards to moving forward. How can Hong Kong people have confidence in the government when nothing has been learned, and most importantly, adequately acted on by the government since the 2003 national security issue. The issues today don't appear to be a continuation of Occupy, but a continuation of the failure of the government to understand the political concerns of Hong Kong people since the handover. R says, Fanny Law says the current protests stem from Occupy. The government tried the same thing then to calm things down, stop the occupation, and we will listen to you. But did they listen? What happened? Legislators were removed, new rules were made for returning officers who blocked people from running, a reporter was refused a visa renewal, etc. The government says they will listen, but they don't listen. They believe they know best, so their ears are closed. Evidence, the first marches in June, which started this, says R. Drake says, if I owe you money and delay payment for months, then can I ask you to be grateful for the first instalment and call it an olive branch, says Drake. Ling says, in relation to yesterday's protests at the US consulate, while America may be the perceived standard bearer of democracy, let's not forget its current president did not win the popular vote. Some of the radical protesters have adopted the slogan China-Nazi to denounce their view of the Chinese government. If anyone thinks the administration is a beacon for liberalism and racial harmony, they are sadly deluded. Tony says if the protesters want the government to do nothing, then maybe they should do the same. Dee says, I believe Fanny Law's comments before the news about designated zones for the press were the first time any executive councillor has suggested restricting press coverage of the protest. Can she expand on what she means? Sharon says, where is the evidence that the frontline warriors were given free sex? It could be rumours spread to encourage more to join. Perhaps some boasting. That comes from Sharon. Colin says, Carrie Lam has pushed the Hong Kong people to the brink. Many times she has not listened to the Hong Kong people, despite 1 or 2 million people taking to the streets. Carrie is tone deaf. Alan says, listening today, it seems 90% of the emails you read are CCP authored talking points from people Guilos. Quote, I want more stories about doing business in the Greater Bay Area. Give me a break. And many are attacking RTHK's independence and veracity, which is a good sign. Radio 3 is the only station providing information about Hong Kong in English, and the Wu Mao want to get rid of that. Next, they'll get rid of all the Cantonese station. Okay, we've got some caller. I've got a caller on the line, and it's Matthew. Matthew, good morning.
Hi, morning, Hugh. First, I totally agree with Alan. I mean, anyone who's listened to Backchat for a period of time knows that the tone of the emails have changed completely, and it's, you know, almost all consistent with CCP propaganda. And I think, you know, government officials like Fanny Law or DAB politicians, they can continue to take comfort in their own propaganda, but I really don't think that's going to get us anywhere. You know, sprouting, you know, the root cause of this whole thing being that young girls are providing sex to protesters is really taking us down the wrong path, as is claiming that a weakness.
No, can I clarify on this one?
Sorry, I haven't finished. You can just wait. And saying that national education and more propaganda in the national education system will fix it is also not going to get us to a better place. You know, ultimately, this problem is not about violence by the protesters or by the police. You know, in fact, I think it's misleading to even frame this. The conversation is constantly framed about the violent young protesters, but let's not forget there's been 1 million, 2 million, more than 1.7 million, and I believe it was more than 1.7 million people who stood in the rain. And then this Sunday, let's see how many people come out, because Civil Human Rights Front is organising another march. This is a political problem that must be solved with political solutions. So I want to ask Fanny, what have you learned? Do you have any regrets from not having stood up sooner and expressed the will of the Hong Kong people to the Executive Council and to your CE and to the CCP in the whole extradition bill discussion? What have you learned from that?
Okay.
And, no, I haven't finished that. Sorry, yeah. Fanny, I haven't finished. And then I want to know, how are you going to apply that learning to help us? What are you going to do as a representative of Hong Kong people in the Executive Council to fix this problem? I don't want to hear what you think Avery should do or what the protesters should do. This is a political problem. You're a politician. Tell me what you're going to do. Thank you.
Matthew, I thank you for all your views, and I think listeners of this program do have critical and independent thinking. You have put forward many ideas and views. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to discuss all of this. I think many protesters were sort of put off by the government's lack of response to their demands in the first place. In particular, in June, they thought that, you know, the government ignore them. So it's a whole basket of factors contributing to the situation today, and we really have to isolate them and then tackle each of them patiently, individually. Young people have its own views. Okay, no. Let me finish.
What have you learned? What have you learned from not standing up sooner, and how are you going to act differently now to save Hong Kong from?
No, I have not trumpeted what I have done behind the scene. I have not trumpeted about this, and you think that I've done nothing. But never mind, okay? I don't need credit. I think it's important that Hong Kong people...
You might not need credit, but Hong Kong needs politicians that they can respect and stand up for. So if you think you've done something that deserves credit... No.
Because
that's what people are screaming out for is political leadership.
I think...
If you've done something great, let us know, because we all want to hear it. We all want to get behind you, but if you haven't...
I
think it sound like you have.
I think talking to individuals, talking to our young people, drawing out their grievances, removing whatever... thing that is right in their heart, that is bothering them. That is ultimately the solution. Untie the knot in their heart. We don't need to boast about it. We don't have to trumpet about it. You know, very few young people today listen to the radio or even read newspapers. They have their own echo chamber.
More than you or I. They are not naive.
They are not naive. They are very intelligent.
If you continue to disrespect them in that manner, how do you expect to go forward? You're spreading rumors that the reason...
No, that's rumor. I don't know whether this is the one point...
To the male protesters.
Can we go to that? Yeah, I mean, you just, sorry, Fanny Law, you said there was evidence.
There is evidence. That is the child, the daughter of a friend's friend. That's second-hand knowledge, but it's direct. It's real, okay? Direct, and it's real.
Sorry,
and the girl actually wrote a piece.
Can we just get this?
It's an outrageous statement for an executive councillor to get on the air.
Just to clarify.
No. I did not get on the air. It was Hugh who read out an email.
Can I just clarify? The email said that there was an underage girl who had been effectively a comfort woman for protesters, but you're saying that that's sort of been substantiated in some way. You have evidence that that's credible.
Please report. I mean, Fanny, come on, it's underage comfort girls. If you have any evidence, come forward.
This is outrageous. It's just too much, Fanny. And even if there's only one case, how can talking about that one case...
I don't want to digress. I really don't want to digress. No, I don't want to. It was Hugh who read the email. It was not me who raised it.
Where are those emails coming from, Fanny? You know as well as I do how the United Front machine works.
Okay, let's not dwell on this. Okay, if you want to believe. If you don't want to believe, just don't believe. Okay, that's not the key point, and let's not dwell on it. I think it's very important.
And what you're going to do.
It's very important.
All right, Matthew. Okay, thanks very much indeed for your call. And you'll have plenty of other opportunities.
No, I think
Fanny Law, can I just say, it's really, we're very grateful that you've come out here, but I've got to say it's been really hard to get anyone from the administration or the executive council. We've asked day after day after day after day, and it's really good to have you. But why is it so difficult to get someone from the government to articulate the government position?
No, I'll be very happy to if you could just dwell on one subject at a time, because I think it's not helpful just to read out a bunch of emails and then we just respond to one or two points and then we don't have enough time to discuss it thoroughly. I'll be very happy, for example, to invite Avery for a chat and even going to your political party, and then let's thresh out the issues.
Could you persuade an executive councillor to come on Backchat?
No, I don't know whether Backchat is the right forum for this one.
So with no other guests, all right? Just an executive councillor responding to listeners. Or the chief executive could come on.
No, I think, Matthew asked a very valid point as to what lessons we have learned from this one. And I would just conclude by saying that sometimes even our elected representatives may not fully have their fingers on the pulse. We have to go to the people direct. to listen to what they have to say.
Come on this program. Come on this program.
Well, I want face-to-face discussion with individuals with grievances, and then listen to them.
We've got plenty of individuals with grievances.
Okay,
don't worry about
just
that.
come on to your program.
We can provide that,
and then we can discuss thoroughly what are the issues.
Just you.